Well, good morning, Bay Pres family. Yeah, nice strong response. You guys are good and awake. I like it. It's good to see you this morning. I just have to say, uh, I had an absolute blast on Friday night. And if you don't know what Friday night was, Friday night we got the chance to partner with the Tim Tebow Foundation and co-host what's called Night to Shine, which is basically we got to throw a party and a prom for teenagers and adults with all types of disabilities. And it was so much fun. And I loved getting to see so many of you out there as well. So I just wanted to pause and say thank you to all the volunteers who showed up because you were absolutely amazing. And it was so fun. Yeah, like totally worth celebrating. I find it rare to find spaces where adults with disabilities get to have people show up who just want to celebrate them and love them. And then to know that they were shared the story of the gospel and shared about Jesus' love is amazing too. So it was just a beautiful night. Funny story, I have to kind of just like reveal this. So Elizabeth helps me, she organizes me, she puts things on my calendar, places I'm supposed to be. And so she had put on my calendar, FYI, Night to Shine, 6 to 9. So I was like, great, I'll show up. And I thought, I'm gonna come early. So I'm gonna get here at like 5:30. And I knew that I hadn't registered to be a volunteer. So I was like, I'm gonna have to kind of sneak in. So I drove here and I park on the other side and I know like, hey, I got keys. I know how to get in. I know how to like finagle my way around the building. I can sneak in. And so then I come in here and there's nobody in here. And then I'm like, well, that's weird. So then I walk over, and there's nobody in Lakeview Hall. And I'm like, what is happening? So I'm texting Matt. I was like, either I'm really early or like, no, like what's going on? No one's here. And then I found out, I was like, oh, it's at Lost Center. So then I had to drive to Lost Center and figure it out. So it was kind of a funny moment, but I made it and it was beautiful. But I find myself, I don't know, I always end up in situations where I'm like, oh, I guess I should have looked closer at the details. And one of those was actually in preparation for this sermon. So I think it was back in August. We had a meeting. It was Matt, myself, Graham, Jay, and we're talking through what are the upcoming sermon series. We're kind of mapping out the whole year. And we got to this one. We're in Mark, and we're going to be talking about this. And I don't know if I heard Bethesda or if somebody said Bethesda, but they were like, oh, yeah, we're going to do Mark 8, and Jesus heals a man at Bethesda. And I'm like, I've been to Bethesda. Like, I rose my hand. I was like, sign me up. I want that one. Like, I've got pictures. I'm ready to go. And then, a week and a half ago, I'm like, it's time to start digging into that particular text. I'm looking it up. And then I'm like, wait, this isn't Bethesda. This is Bethsaida. Like, that's a totally different place. So I decided not to bring you pictures of Bethesda because it would have been pretty confusing, but I have been to a place. This is interesting because Bethsaida, there's a little controversy. We're not actually sure where present day Bethsaida is, but we know that it's on the Sea of Galilee and it's really close to towns like Capernaum. That place I've been to. So I do have a picture of that. To show you guys, and that's right outside of Capernaum, right on the water. And then I've got another picture where if you flip it and you actually look out, you can see what it looks like on the water. And so that's probably similar to what it may have looked like in Bethsaida. And part of what I love about getting to go to the Holy Land is you get to go see places where Jesus has actually been. But it's also kind of like this. When I see that picture, I'm also like, well, it also kind of looks like Lake Erie, right? It kind of looks like it could be anywhere in the world. And I think that's part of what's beautiful about whenever we start to engage in the scriptures is that it helps us see like, I don't have to go anywhere special. God's actually already come here and God meets us here. And so it's kind of an interesting play that I was like, oh, I thought I was gonna be preaching about Bethesda and now we're talking about Bethsaida. But I love it because there's something that happens in this story. It's one of the most like interesting stories, and just that whole line about like I see people, but they look like trees. There's just so many things in here that are fascinating. But I think part of one of the things that as I was reading and studying was this question came up of, do you know those people? Do you have people in your life that it just seems like they have all the luck in the world? Don't you just hate those people? Like everything goes their way, everything goes right, like everything they ask for just gets handed to them on a silver platter. And I think what's interesting is you're gonna see as we unpack this passage that that's not actually the way life goes. That it's not that some people have certain luck, it's that some people have a certain viewpoint and some people have a certain perspective, they have a certain posture. So I wanna go into the passage and take a look at this. So Matt just read it, but let's dive in. So in Mark chapter 8, verse 22, it says, "And they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him." And I love that. It doesn't even tell us who it is. We don't know their names. It's not even the blind man himself. It's his group of friends or maybe some family or somebody that cares about him. They bring him to Jesus and they beg him. Beg him. Like, I wish I'd kind of been there to see it. Like, did they get on their knees? Did they just have to keep saying it? What did that look like? How did they make it clear? Like, we are begging you, Jesus. And what they beg him for is to just touch him. They don't beg Jesus to heal him. They're just like, will you just touch him? Now, there's something really interesting. In the ancient world, they had this idea of if Jesus would touch him, there is some transfer of power that can happen. And you see this play up or pop up in other stories too, where there was a woman who had been bleeding for so many years. She had spent all her money on doctors, had gotten no help, and she just thought, if I can just touch his cloak, I'll be healed. And she was. So there is this idea of they're asking Jesus, hey, would you touch him? Would you just give anything that you've got? And I love how Jesus responds. And it says, and he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And that's interesting to me because, like, for him to take the blind man by the hand, he already fulfilled what they asked him to do, right? He touched this man. And I love that he touched the man and he took him by the hand because it's very similar, like a handshake. When you greet somebody, you meet someone, you shake their hand for the first time. Part of why that's such a thing is it's the one place where when I touch you, you're also touching me back. As opposed to if I put my hand on your shoulder, that's me touching you. So this is a very dignifying thing that Jesus is doing with this man. It's like he's greeting him and saying, I see you, come on, let's go. And he takes him out of the village. And then it says, and when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, do you see anything? Now, again, this is just wild to me, like this is one of those places where the truth must be stranger than fiction, because why would they have written it down unless this is how it happened? But something that's interesting is in the ancient world, they had this idea that our saliva actually had some medicinal purposes. And the way I like to think of it is it's kind of like the way your mom would do things. Did anybody like your mom? If you had something on your face, she would and then like I'm gonna get it. It's kind of like mom spit is magical, right? Like it can do all kinds of things. I think it's kind of like that, but there's this idea of like Jesus was communicating to the man, I'm paying attention to you and I'm gonna work with you. And it's also interesting because, I don't wanna be crass, but like he can't see Jesus spit, but he can hear it. And he knows something's coming. And I find that fascinating, right? Because I don't know if Jesus like spit in his hands, like the mom thing, or if he just literally spit in the guy's face. I don't know, but there is a gap between when you hear it and when you feel it, right? And I don't know how long that gap is. But I think it tells us a lot about this blind man, that he's not pulling back, he's not running away. He's not looking at Jesus and saying, how dare you? Like, how dare you spit in my face? Like, he's just there. He's like, yeah, whatever. And then Jesus asks him, he says, do you see anything? And he looked up and said, I see people, but they look like trees walking. Now, again, this is one of those places where it's like, what is happening? This is so fascinating to me. And there's a few things we can infer from it. The fact that he says, I see people, but they look like trees, it's highly likely that this is a man who had his sight at one time, but then lost it for one reason or another. Because how else would he know what a tree looks like? And so for him to see people and say they look like trees, this is somebody who's actually hoping to get his sight back. And this is also one of those places where, as I've grown up in church, people have given me a lot of questions to, when I come to the Bible, some questions that help me study, some questions that help me learn. And as I've gotten older, one of the questions that I've learned to love the most, that has been one of the most eye-opening and helpful, is start asking the question, why did they write this down? And part of why that's so helpful is it helps put it in context. It helps put it in a place of knowing, okay, there's an actual human being, Mark, who's writing actual words, and he's writing to actual people who live in a real place in a real time. And that's one of those things of like, why did they write that down? Now, this makes a whole lot more sense if we backtrack a little bit in the story and see some other things that happened just before this. Now, oftentimes when you ask that question, why did they write that down? You're going to end up in like all over the Old Testament or other places because they're constantly quoting. But this is one where we just need to back up a little bit. Because if you're here last week and you heard Matt preach at the end of Mark chapter 7, we're kind of in the middle of Mark chapter 8. There's a lot that happened in between there. A couple things that happened. One is Jesus actually healed a deaf man, and actually kind of a similar interaction. There was some spit exchanged as well, and like Jesus actually put his finger in the man's ears. It's like, yeah, why'd you write that down? And then Jesus also does another miracle where he feeds the 4,000. Some people are very familiar with the Jesus feeding the 5,000, but it's actually, there's two miracles in Mark where he does the 5,000, then he also feeds the 4,000. And then this story picks up not long after that. So what I want to go back is to right after when Jesus fed the 4,000. So he'd taken some loaves and some fish again and just kept breaking and breaking and breaking, and they fed so many people, and then there's basketfuls left over. And at that point, it says in Mark chapter 8, verse 11, it says, the Pharisees came and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. Now that word argue is really interesting because it's a Greek word, it's syzoteo. And the Greeks often, they take two words and kind of smash them together, and that's what's happening here. And so it's taking the word seek and together, and it's pushing those two words together. So literally it's saying they came to seek together with Jesus. But what you hear is they're demanding and they're asking and they're arguing for a sign. They have very much a certain posture and a certain filter to this. Instead of this being a collaboration and an opportunity for some back and forth and some dialogue and a chance to learn, this is them setting up and saying, will you prove to us that you're worthy? After he just did a miracle of feed 4,000 people. And notice the difference in the posture there. And it keeps going. And it says, and Jesus sighed deeply in his spirit and said, why does this generation seek a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. And he left them, got into the boat, and went to the other side. Now, this is part of where you might be like, okay, well, what's up with that? Why does the blind man, Jesus takes him by the hand, walks him out, heals him? These guys show up, they ask for a sign, and Jesus is like, no sign will be given to you. It's not that this guy has all the luck and that Jesus is being mean to these guys. What Jesus is pointing out and what he's showing us is it doesn't matter how many signs I do. If all you're looking for is the proof that I am who I say I am, it's never going to be enough. Because clearly there's no shortage of Jesus doing miracles in the story of Mark, in the Gospel of Mark. But what he's highlighting is there's something in you Pharisees, that keeps you from seeing what's right in front of your eyes. And it's interesting because then it goes on. And then we get an insight into the disciples. And so I've got a graphic to kind of show actually before we go there, kind of the highlight of the difference between the Pharisees and the blind man. But if you look at that, like one happens in a place called Dalmanutha, and it's the Pharisees, the religious experts, and the others in Bethsaida. And it's just a they. It's not necessarily a specific, it's his friends. They come asking for a sign, and they're very much testing. And then Jesus, his friends, like the blind man's friends, they just come begging. And then what you see is Jesus sighs and then leaves. And then Jesus takes the man by the hand and he leads him. He heals him. And the theme is they were asking for miracles, but demanding more. And the other guy just wanted help. And I think it highlights what's the difference. Now, what's interesting is the story that happens right after this is a story where Jesus finds the disciples in between those two people, in between those two camps, with an invitation for, okay, how are you going to respond? And so that's where we pick up here in Mark chapter 8. And in verse 14, it says, now they had forgotten to bring bread, and they had only one loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. Right? So he's saying very much like, hey, look, the Pharisees just came and they challenged, they asked me some questions. Be careful about their attitude, be careful about their posture. But notice how the disciples respond. It says, and they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. Right? Never said anything about like, how dare you guys not bring any bread? You ever been in that place where somebody says something to you and then you just project onto whatever they say all kinds of meaning that they didn't actually intend? So there are often times where as I'm working with a therapist and I'm working through some things, I very much know that I have a story and a narrative where I'm afraid that I'm not going to be enough. And so sometimes somebody will ask me a question that's very simple, very, very curious, very inquisitive, like, hey, did you get bread? And I'd be like, no, I'm doing all this stuff. Like lay off me. I'm trying to get everything taken care of. You know, it's like sometimes you can project onto the situation. It's like, whoa. I was just being curious. Like, you know, sometimes what's happening is we actually project onto other people what's going on in us. And we see that happening with the disciples. Whereas they're absolutely in a place where they're trying to please their rabbi. They're trying to do everything right. They're trying to check all the boxes. And so when he says, like, watch out for the leaven, they're like, oh, he must be talking about the fact that we didn't bring enough bread. But it goes on. And he says, why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having your eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many baskets full of pieces did you take up? And they said to him, 12. And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said to him, 7. And he said to them, do you not yet understand? He's highlighting, hey, there's something that happens when we approach God, when we approach Jesus, when we approach life with a certain filter and a certain attitude, with a certain posture. And he's trying to help them see. And I want to go back to the blind man. Because he said, and he looked up and said, I see people, but they look like trees walking. And then it says, then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again. And he opened his eyes, his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, do not even enter the village. And see, what Jesus is trying to help the disciples see is how we approach Jesus, how we come to Jesus, affects a whole lot of how we receive and see him. And if we come to him in a place where we are not willing to admit that I don't have all the answers, that I don't know everything, if we're not willing to say, yeah, I don't see everything clearly yet, we don't actually get the second touch, which gives that sight and that restoring back. And see, the disciples were in that place where they're trying to prove to Jesus, like, hey, we got this. We can do this, right? Like, trust us. We can get enough bread. It's okay. And what Jesus is trying to help them see is like, actually what's better is if you're just really honest. If you just tell me, like, yeah, I don't see it clearly yet. And what Jesus is saying, hey, I'm willing to put my hands again. I'm willing to touch. I'm willing to give insight. It's not that Jesus isn't willing to do that. It's, are we willing to ask for it? And here's the truth, that we will always see Jesus the most clearly when we approach him the way the blind man did, when we approach him with humility. And as we're talking about that, it's so funny to me because when I try to like gauge myself and figure out like, am I humble? You know, even just asking the question, like, am I humble? Like, yeah, I think I am. Man, look at me. I'm being so humble right now, you know? Like, it's such a catch-22. It's such a trap. Like, you just fall into it. But I think there's some questions that we can ask that can help us on that way. And one of my favorites, one of the questions I'd love to ask is, what am I willing to do? And it gets me out of that place, and it puts me in a place where I can see, do I see myself as above certain things? Or do I see certain things as being beneath me? I find that to be a really helpful question for me to gauge. Another thing that's really helpful for is, when was the last time, or who was the last person that changed my mind? I don't know about you, but I'm a pretty stubborn person. And when I think I'm right, I really think I'm right. And I stick to it. But there's something about me being reminded and remembering I don't know everything. And so that's a helpful thing, is who was the last person that changed my mind? Because it helps open up, is there something in me that's willing to listen and willing to receive? There's also something else, is like, are there people that I'm unwilling to be taught by? That I already go into it and say, like, that person has nothing to teach me. Because that says way more about me than it does about them. And my hope and my prayer for all of us is that we can be the people who find ourselves in that same crossroads that the disciples are in, who find ourselves in that same place where we have a choice on how do we respond. And we respond in humility, and we respond with a posture and an attitude that says, I need you, Jesus. I don't see everything clearly. Will you touch me again? Will you give me sight? Let me pray for us. God, we thank you so much for your goodness and for your grace, and for this fact that you draw near to us, for the fact that you take us by the hand and you touch us, you heal us. And so God, will you come again? Will you put your hands on our eyes? Will you help us see clearly? Will you help us see your love for us and your love for all people? And we pray all these things in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen.